Alright, it needs to be said, Disney has really been releasing the stinkers lately. So much so that it's been really hard to get excited for just about anything coming out of Star Wars. The Acolyte was so universally hated that I didn't even bother dusting off my Disney Plus subscription. The best I've heard about Skeleton Crew is that it doesn't suck. Way to sell me on it, guys. And that's to say nothing of the absolute reckless amount of kids content released. A bazillion Lego Star Wars, Tales of the Empire, Tales of the Jedi, Young Jedi Adventures. It's pretty safe to say that Disney has tried their best to make fans care as little about the next Star Wars title as they do Marvel, or the latest live-action adaptation of a classic cartoon. But there's been one exception, one bright, shining ray of hope, and that was Andor Season 2. Things were already looking pretty stale for the Star Wars scene by the fall of 2022. We had already run through the best The Mandalorian could give us and had been let down by the poor structure, storytelling, and ADHD-like confusion of the Book of Boba Fett, where Jon Favreau sort of forgot who the main character was for like half the series, and then we got chowed by Obi-Wan Kenobi. But then we got Andor, an intelligent series that doesn't talk down to its audience, doesn't try to force a very particular set of socio-political ideals on the audience, and focuses heavily on a brand new main cast in a world that's been well established for 50 years without at any time feeling the need to default to let's just go back to Tatooine again. It was a breath of fresh air. It was a testament to the fact that Tony Gilroy, so far the only Disney-era producer to release a film that is not universally hated by anyone who had ever seen a Star Wars film prior to 2015, really takes his responsibilities seriously when writing a story set in a universe loved by nearly 1 billion people worldwide. But there was always this little nagging concern in the back of my mind since I watched the final episode of Andor Season 1. Where can this series possibly go from here? And will the Gilroy brothers be able to pull off any further brilliant pieces of writing? Or would Disney finally sink their dirty claws into Andor and milk it for all it's worth without giving the fans anything of substance in return? Well, in May of 2025, more than 2.5 years after Season 1 aired, we finally got our answer. It's pretty dank good, but not really in the way I think many fans were probably hoping. Before I go any further, I will warn you that this video is going to be very spoiler heavy for Rogue One and both seasons of Andor, so you probably won't want to watch if you're averse to that sort of thing. I'll try and split this video between spoilers for Season 1 and Rogue One and Season 2 separately, so you can skip the sections that talk about Season 2 when you see a little warning banner on screen if you have seen the earlier titles and aren't sure whether you want to get invested in Season 2 or not. First, let's talk about what made Andor Season 1 great. Andor Season 1 can be broken down into 4 basic story arcs. The first is the introduction arc, where we learn most of the basic players. Cassian Andor is trying to find his lost sister, who was separated from him when they were young, but is jumped by a couple of corrupt cops and has to kill them in self-defense. Well, one of them in self-defense. This draws the attention of Cyril Karn, a Primor security officer intent on enforcing the law and bringing Andor to justice. He's well-meaning, extremely detail-oriented, and idealistic to a fault, but he doesn't inspire others and often doesn't think of the consequences of his actions. All he knows is what he thinks is right and wrong, and he always tries to do the right thing. As Andor returns to his homeworld, we see his friends, business associates, and accomplices, whatever. He works with them on shady stuff. The main one is Bix, his close friend who smuggles the odd item that Andor can liberate from Imperial storage lockers. We also meet Brasso, Andor's best friend with a good heart and always willing to provide an alibi if it's needed. We also meet Marva Andor, Cassian's adoptive mother, who's getting on in years and is one of those too old to give a dank what people think types with an unshakable spirit. Lastly, we meet Bix's smuggler, Luthen Rael, a high-profile antiquities dealer on Coruscant, but in secret he delivers technology, weapons, and intelligence to a number of rebel groups operating throughout the galaxy. Cassian impresses him by getting a hard-to-find ship part, but during their meetup, Cyril leads a strike team to Ferrix to try and apprehend Andor, causing him and Luthen to team up and the two escape Ferrix on Luthen's ship. This concludes the first arc. Chapter 2 is the Aldhani arc. Luthen convinces Andor to help a team he has undertaking a dangerous mission and offers him enough money that he can remain in hiding long enough for interest to die down and for him to hopefully return to Ferrix one day. Luthen drops him off on the planet Aldhani, where we find Vel, the team's leader. She isn't happy to hear that Luthen wants her to take on Andor, but she finally relents, and it's probably a good thing because the mission does not end up going to plan. In the meantime, we're introduced to Dedra Meero, an ISB supervisor supervisor who has been bypassing bureaucracy to get information she doesn't have clearance for, but it turns out she has good reason to do so because she's learned that someone is providing stolen Imperial goods to rebel cells throughout the galaxy. And the last piece to show up where it shouldn't be was the piece Andor was trying to sell to Luthen. Ferrix is now a target of an Imperial investigation, and we also meet Mon Mothma as she visits Luthen's shop, and they talk about how Mon Mothma's attempts to fund the rebellion are starting to result in Imperial oversight and financial issues. The only other characters really worth mentioning here are Cinta, Vel's lover and the main sabotage specialist in the group, and Nemik, an idealistic young man who has written a manifesto about the Empire, tyranny, and its opposition to freedom. Andor's assault on Aldhani works, but Nemik is mortally wounded and shares his manifesto with Andor in his dying hours, which takes the form of what I'll call epic monologue number 1. Andor kills one of the survivors after they proposition him to kill the others and take the loot for themselves instead of giving it to Luthen to fund rebellion throughout the Empire. He then flees with the amount that he had already agreed upon with Luthen. As he's in hiding in what would appear to be a tropical paradise, he is wrongfully detained by Imperial troopers, convicted without trial, and sentenced to prison under a new tyrannical policy Emperor Palpatine instituted following the attack on Aldhani. This is where Chapter 3, the prison arc, begins. All the while that Andor is away, things are slowly getting worse on Ferrix, when Cyril, now disgraced and working for the Department of Imperial Standards, starts trying to use his new position to find information that might help him somehow regain his lost honor. He is brought before Dedra, who basically orders him to stay out of it since he's not a real cop anymore, and then proceeds to use the intel he's learned to occupy Ferrix and begins arresting anyone suspected of aiding Andor and the smuggling ring, including Bix and a few others Andor knows. These people are gruesomely tortured by Dr. Gorst, a horrifyingly nonchalant tormentor. Normally with torturers, you usually see them portrayed as someone who derives pleasure from the pain of their victims, but I think Gorst's complete indifference to their suffering and simple pleasure in the work itself is so many more levels more terrifying, just my opinion. Andor is transferred to a forced labor prison in Narkina 5 where we are introduced to Kino Loy, probably my favorite Andy Serkis character ever. And yes, that's even including the fact that I still drop Gollum quotes every chance I get in casual conversation. Kino Loy is a no-nonsense character who just wants the shift he supervises to do their jobs well enough that they don't all get electrocuted at the end of their shifts, at least until his sentence is served and he can go home. Narkina 5 is sterile. It's clean, well lit, there are no bars, few guards. It's actually a beautiful prison, but the constant threat of being electrocuted through the floor, the pace that's fed to them through tubes, and the fact that they march everywhere like well-conditioned cattle is unsettling a way I never thought I could experience from watching a fictional depiction of prison. Kino fights Andor's attempts to plan a prison break with his fellow inmates at every turn, not wanting to jeopardize his own release, until it's discovered that their release is a lie. Instead, upon serving their sentence, inmates are shuffled around the Imperial prison system, moving from prison to prison. Realizing that he was now serving a system of false promises and forced labor, Kino finally relents and helps Andor plan their prison break. They stage it, and against all odds, they manage to seize control of a security control office. Kino addresses the entire prison. Enter epic monologue number 2. This is where I will call Kino Loy's one-way out speech. It incites the entire prison complex to rebel and attempt to escape, and as they reach the outer doors, they discover that the prison is in the middle of a massive lake. As prisoners that he had been leading in rebellion rush past him to hurl themselves over the ledge and into the waters below, he looks at Andor and simply says, "I can't swim." Holy Sith spit. Talk about having your hopes ripped away, rekindled, and doused again. Have I praised the writing in this show enough yet? This is also the exact same episode that we get epic monologue numero tres, which is, it's what's the best word? Everything! Yes, this speech is freaking everything. Everything I love about Star Wars. Everything I need from Star Wars. Everything I will hope for in future Star Wars. Mwah. The final arc I'll call the Resolve arc. Everyone turns up on Ferrix. Marva has died of natural causes, thank the Force. The last thing this series needs is more tragedy than it already has. Andor returns to try and attend the funeral in secret. Dedra intends to use the funeral to lure Andor back to the planet. Luthen is intent on killing Andor because now he's just a loose end to his operation, and Cyril is still intent on regaining his lost honor and goes to try and bring Andor in. The entire town shows up to the village square for the funeral, led by Bros Brasso and Marva's droid, B2. B plays a pre-recorded eulogy from Marva herself, apparently knowing that her time was short. Epic monologue number 4. Marva's speech condemns the Empire as a cancer, burrowing its way into their lives so gradually that nobody noticed it, slowly choking the life from them until it was too late. But when an irate Imperial officer tries to silence her pleas for action and disperse the crowd, a riot ensues, followed by a massacre. In the midst of the chaos, a mob separates Dedra from her escort, and Cyril manages to get her out of harm's way, and there's an interesting exchange between them where it seems like he's finally earned her trust and the two of them may start to work together, a nice setup for Season 2's villain arcs. Andor uses the chaos as a distraction to rescue Bix from her torture chamber and sends her off-world with Brasso, B, and a few other survivors of the massacre that will likely be hunted down for reasons. As Luthen returns to his ship, he discovers he isn't alone. Cassian is already there waiting for him, and he gives Luthen a choice: kill him or bring him into the rebellion. A tiny post-credits teaser shows droids using the pieces being manufactured at the Narkina 5 prison being installed in something in space, and the camera zooms out to show it's the Death Star. Andor was actually partially responsible for manufacturing the Death Star. How crazy is that? This scene also depicts an actual understanding of how a slave-based economy like the Empire would have actually functioned. It shows a reason for the Empire's police state, not just to instill fear in the populace, but it actually makes active use of those that have found themselves on the wrong side of that fear-based policy. It shows the entire Tarkin doctrine from ground level up. It's not just Star Destroyers and Death Stars daring you to pick up a blaster and ride the whirlwind. It's family members snatched from the streets by police and never seen again. Its entire world's devoted to forced labor to keep costs down for the Emperor's insane projects. People used up until they expire for nothing more or less than the glory of the Emperor himself. This is a damn good ending, knowing that this series occurs 5 years prior to the Battle of Yavin, and that Rogue One, in which Andor is very much alive and a part of the Rebel Alliance, is set just a few weeks or months before the Battle of Yavin. Obviously, anyone who's seen Rogue One knows that Luthen must have chosen to bring him into the fold, but this leaves us five glorious years of possible Andor to choose from. Andor Season 1 was a masterpiece of unique storytelling within an existing universe without having to rely on that universe to prop it up. Even if you had no idea what the Death Star was, what a Star Destroyer was, who the Emperor was, what a Jedi or Sith was, anything about Kyber or the Rakata, this series stood on its own to paint a picture of the universe, one that new fans could find approachable, but existing fans could still recognize as being very much rooted in the Star Wars galaxy. Each of these 4 story arcs built directly off the one that came before. Each directly contributed to Andor's character and inched us ever closer to the Battle of Scarif, though there was never need to ever state it directly anywhere in the dialogue. No Easter eggs hidden throughout each episode, just a 10-second post-credit teaser at the end of the season. Now, Season 2 of Andor is very different. It still kind of follows a number of multi-episode story arcs, but in Season 2, the arcs are often separated year by year. Where Season 1 followed Andor and company for what appears to be a few weeks or months, Season 2 covers the entire history of the Rebel Alliance from 4 BBY all the way up to the moment that sparks the start of Rogue One. This is where I'll call spoilers and let you skip if you prefer, and then I'll try and keep the comparison of the 2 seasons spoiler free. It might not be completely spoiled, just a bit on the sour side. For Season 2, the arcs are actually pretty hit and miss. The first arc is the heist arc. We start off 1 year after the massacre of Ferrix, with Andor posing as an Imperial test pilot working with a rebel mole in a research facility developing a new advanced TIE fighter prototype. Andor needs to steal the TIE Avenger, but it's far more advanced than what he had been trained on, and he very quickly starts crashing into stuff and shooting things, raising an alarm. He manages to gain enough control to shoot the bay doors off the hangar it's being stored in and gets it airborne, escapes his pursuers, and gets into space. Now, personally, I have no idea why the rebels even bothered stealing this thing. Onboard life support, built-in hyperdrive, shields, missile launchers, torpedoes, rotary blasters. There was no way Tarkin would have ever greenlit this project. Why produce one amazing advanced TIE fighter when you could produce 10 cheap ones and just swarm your enemy? What's the life of one meaningless pilot in the grand scheme? Or 10. Anyway, Andor goes to his rendezvous point to deliver the Avenger. Chuta, I cannot keep calling it that. I'm just gonna call it the TIE from now on. Anyway, he arrives at the site and is captured by a group of armed refugees from Maya Pei's rebel cell. Apparently, she is now dead, and her group was left for dead by someone who claimed to be out looking for survivors. They are starving and desperately trying to figure out how the TIE works so that some of them can leave to get help. The group eventually breaks down due to infighting, and Andor manages to sneak back to the ship and takes off, showing showing the planet that he's been trapped on this whole time was Yavin 4. I'm not really sure that revelation helps anything because, well, these people were starving, killing each other, and getting picked off by predators. Did these people somehow pull things together long enough to learn how to survive on Yavin and start the whole Rebel Alliance? If not, why was this the site that was chosen to serve as the Rebel base? It's sort of hinted at one time that Andor brought the people here, but at other times it's stated that he joined up with them. So which was it? I cannot imagine that Andor would want to come back here on the off chance that anyone had survived. I think that was actually a bit of poor storytelling, to tell the truth, a rare miss, but what do I know? I'm sure you probably read the obscure comic somewhere that explains the whole process and will educate this filthy casual in the comments. Elsewhere, apparently Cyril and Dedra didn't just partner professionally, the two are living together now, though there's no warmth here at all. It is so weird. Both are presented in season 1 as pretty humorless, with Dedra only smiling when she's interrogating suspects or sparring with her political rivals, and Cyril, I'm pretty sure I still haven't seen him smile. But this pairing, I mean, based on what we know from them in season 1, it's a match made by the cosmic force itself. But seriously, I cringed at their interactions, but not in a bad way. It just felt really uncomfortable. Even when Dedra is defending Cyril to his overbearing mother, you kind of have to wonder what her actual motivations are, because she is cold, emotionless, humorless, and vicious in her delivery. A perfect adversary to Cyril's mother, but she's also sort of that way in all of her interactions with Cyril, so it really kind of makes you feel sorry for him. The last part of the heist arc is Andor's friends, Bix, Brasso, and Wilmon, who was barely mentioned in season 1 but gets promoted to a primary character in season 2. They're hiding out on the planet Mina Rao at a grain-producing operation. They're working illegally and scraping by. An Imperial inspection finds them, and Bix is attacked by the officer in charge and kills him in self-defense. But Brasso is not so lucky. Andor arrives in time to save Wilmon and Bix, but he's too late to save his best friend. It's a gut punch, because I loved Brasso. He was almost a moral center for Andor whenever he was around. Now, I'm not really a fan of this entire arc. The story just drags on and on. There is really no payoff or explanation why the tie was stolen in the first place, or why these friends in particular chose to stick together while Andor was out rebelling it up. But Brasso's death, Bix's assault, and revelation that she's still suffering night terrors from her time with Dr. Gorst all pretty much hint that nobody but Andor will be safe this season, and that Andor's slow transition from the reluctant freedom fighter to unapologetic murderer for a cause is not going to be a smooth affair. Also, Mon Mothma's daughter gets married and Luthen's there, and the Rakata were mentioned again. Teehee. Otherwise, that whole subplot, I mean, it's not bad, it's like the rest of this arc. It's irrelevant to the rest of Andor. It doesn't hold a candle to what we came to expect from season 1, and it's never mentioned again after this arc wraps up. It's completely irrelevant to the rest of Andor, both season 1 and the entire series as a whole. Mon Mothma's husband gives a wedding toast, and if you thought this was the moment for epic monologue number 1, nope, it's just your garden variety wedding toast from someone who's not exactly happy in their marriage. Chapter 2 starts a full year after Chapter 1 ends. Yeah, that's right, a giant time jump right in the middle of the season. Bix and Andor are living in a safe house run by Luthen on Coruscant, and that whole prototype fighter heist thing is never mentioned again. Anyway, Bix and Andor are struggling personally. Bix is still suffering from insomnia and night terrors. She's even started sleepwalking with a gun throughout the house. Yeah, that's safe. She's abusing an unknown substance when Cassian's away to try and keep from dreaming, but when he's home, she tries to make do without it. She also wants to start treating the safe house like a home and start acting like actual residents of the area, being friendly with the local shopkeepers and decorating the safe house. Meanwhile, Cassian is going full Luthen and balks at her every attempt to establish a sense of normalcy or permanence to their situation. This is the main arc that I think most people that saw the trailer were excited about. This is the Fancy Lad arc, where Andor poses as a fashion designer and travels to the planet Gorman to assess the Gorman front and offer advice on operations against the Empire. But he sees the same situation forming on Gorman that he had seen on Ferrix. The Empire was already too deeply entrenched, the Gorman front too far behind technologically, numerically, and militarily. They want his help to hijack an Imperial weapons shipment so they can begin arming themselves, but he tries to talk them out of it. It's already a lost cause in his eyes. This puts him at odds with Luthen, who wants the Gore to fight regardless of how hopeless it is, because their political influence will cause other planets to rise up, up opening new fronts. Meanwhile, Luthen dispatches Vel to work with the Gore, where she reunites with Cinta and the two reconcile, having separated after Ferrix. They lead the mission and everything goes off without a hitch until they are interrupted by some random dude that would actually applaud the work that they were doing, but because one of the inexperienced Gorman front guys pulled a gun on him, they tussle and a single blaster bolt goes off, hitting and killing Cinta. Vel is crushed, distraught, and angry. She lets out all of her anger and frustration on the idiot who got Cinta killed. You might think this is the perfect place for epic monologue number 1, but this isn't really it either. Don't get me wrong, it's a great speech, and you feel her unadulterated hatred of this boy for ripping one of the few things left in this galaxy that she loves away from her. But it's not one of those speeches that causes you to rewind and watch over and over again. It's raw, emotional, and uncomfortable, but there's no nuance, no hidden meaning. It delivers its message and carries on. What makes this whole affair so much worse is the fact that Luthen is playing right into Dedra's hand, because on direct orders from director Krennic, oh yeah, he's definitely in this season and it's a super big deal, and also, either Disney has gotten freaky good at the digital de-aging thing, or Ben Mendelsohn hasn't aged a freaking day in the decade since Rogue One came out. Anyway, Krennic wants a rare mineral only found on Gorman for the Emperor's quote-unquote energy program, but they need a pretense to take it because mining will basically cause an extinction level event on the planet, and they don't want the Gore to stir up sympathy on the galactic stage. It's Dedra's suggestion that they orchestrate a rebellion on Gorman, and so she intentionally made it easy to find and plan heists around the Empire's weapons shipments, and Cyril has been inserted into Gorman as head of the Department of Standards field office, basically making it look like he's had a demotion and making it appear as if he has pro-Gore sympathies that cause the Gorman front to seek him out and include him in their plans. The weapons heist basically ends the Fancy Lad arc that everyone was excited about, but not before Bix has a chance to find Dr. Gorst, strap him to a chair, and subject him to the same torture she was forced to endure at his hands, and simply leaves the room. He gets off easy though, as her and Andor walk away and set off explosives, destroying his entire facility with him still suffering inside. I have to say, I was cheering the entire time. And this begins, I'll call it, the rebirth arc. This is where Andor Season 2 finally pays off. This is where Season 2 doesn't just become an adequate follow-up to the first season, it manages to tell a story that surpasses anything in Season 1 entirely. Once again, we jump an entire year into the future. This time we find Andor and Bix still living together, but now based on Yavin. Bix appears to be off the blue stuff and looks much healthier than she has all season, apparently at peace after the death of Dr. Gorst and able to sleep again. Meanwhile, Andor is torn between his desire to be part of something greater than Luthen's schemes and his devotion to Luthen himself, who is slowly burning bridges with the Alliance and becoming ostracized from the very organization that he helped nurture and bring together. Andor's having trouble healing from a blaster wound, and Bix tries to trick him into visiting a Force healer who Andor considers to be a scam artist, but the healer senses him and actually manages to help his condition, but when he leaves believing they aren't to be trusted, she tells Bix of Andor's great destiny, how he's important to the rebellion. Bix buys it, but Andor won't acknowledge it. Luthen summons Andor, who gets in a bit of hot water with the Alliance over his refusal to claim allegiance, but Luthen needs him to go to Gorman again, this time to kill Dedra Meero. Andor returns to Gorman to find it's about 2 steps removed from a TSA checkpoint. Constant ID scans, security checkpoints, patrols, all they need to do is smile less and grab his crotch a few times, and I would think Andor was trying to hop a flight to El Paso. The Gormans have given the Empire everything they needed to justify full-scale oppression of the population. Andor arrives and starts trying to find an adequate plan to eliminate Meero, but the plaza is now being fortified and the garrison bolstered, mostly with inexperienced recruits, all according to Dedra's plans, as crowds are lured into the plaza by rumors that it had finally been open to the public, and with Imperial-biased news media covering everything, the stage is set. But Cyril sees this and finally starts to realize that Dedra is too smart to let this happen a second time. She would have learned from her experiences on Ferrix, so he confronts her and she admits that everything he had been doing was in service of a plan not to root out outside agitators as he had thought, but was instead to incite the people of Gorman to insurrection so that they could be vilified in the press, pacified absolutely, and their planet completely and utterly destroyed, all for the Emperor's grand vision of the future. Cyril leaves the safety of the complex and enters the crowds of angry protesters. Dedra orders a sniper to shoot one of the inexperienced soldiers that was brought in, and they begin firing into the crowd, with many pulling weapons and trying to fight back, but they were surrounded and caught in the open. It becomes a massacre. Cyril is horrified by what he helped orchestrate, and through the smoke and carnage, he spots Andor, the person he holds personally responsible for his being here, for Ferrix, for the time he loved Dedra only to be manipulated by her own personal ambitions. He attacks Andor and manages to get his rifle. As he's staring down the barrel, Andor simply asks him, "Who are you?" Andor had become a pivotal person in his life, had completely changed Syril's life trajectory, and he didn't even know who he was. As Syril tries to come to grips with this revelation, a blaster bolt strikes him in the head, and Syril falls to the ground dead. In the end, he wasn't a bad person. He had just aligned himself with those who were, and ended up paying the price. It's a death that I personally had not seen coming, and actually found myself lamenting for some time. Syril Karn is sort of the anti-villain. He had always been opposed to the hero, but not in a way that a true villain would be. He never had nefarious goals. He never found himself sliding down a slippery slope, losing his morals and values as he went. He was always virtuous, weak in personality, but strong in character. Syril Karn did not deserve to die, but just like many of the innocents throughout this plaza, he had to die for the glory of the Empire and for Dedra. I couldn't have cared less as the Gorman Front freedom fighters we had seen for several episodes as they were gunned down and hurled across the plaza by brawler droids, but I found myself staring in complete disbelief as Syril laid there on the ground. Now that's good freaking writing. Andor manages to escape Gorman, but fails in his mission to take out Dedra. As she prepares to make her report to Major Partagaz, she loses control, and we see her first true expression of emotion as she can no longer control her own body. The stoic facade she displays to others finally allowed to drop as she realizes what she has sacrificed in the line of duty. Mon Mothma is horrified by the events of Gorman, and she can't stay silent anymore. Bail Organa, who is not portrayed by Jimmy Smits, talk about the end of an era, Bail tries to organize a team to extract her after she makes a speech that's basically committing political suicide and signing her own death warrant. But Bail's team has been infiltrated by an ISB agent, thankfully one who answers to Lonnie Young, so Luthen knows what's about to happen. Luthen has one last mission for Andor, to extract Mon Mothma from the Senate building and lead her to an escort team that will take her the rest of the way to Yavin. And this is where, 3/4 of our way through the season, we finally get epic monologue number 1. It's no Luthen sacrifice, and honestly, I feel her speech went a bit too far. She speaks of the slow death of truth, giving rise to a monster growing and devouring all that the people of the Empire hold dear. It's great, until she ends her speech by saying the monster is Palpatine. We all know it's Palpatine. That doesn't need to be said. That final sign-off was sort of dumbing down the message a bit too much. Maybe they thought that would have made this speech a bit too similar to Marva's eulogy, but at any rate, it's just not on the same level as the Season 1 monologues. At any rate, Andor makes contact with her before Bail's team can, and Andor manages to get her out, killing the ISB agent and Mon Mothma's limo driver, who's also been a well-known ISB spy since Season 1. Mon Mothma finally learns the harsh lesson of the price of rebellion, a price paid in blood and lives, and for the first time, she has no choice but to acknowledge that her hands are not clean in this conflict. Andor returns to Yavin ahead of Mon Mothma and decides he is tired and wants to quit the rebellion, but Bix knows he only wants to quit in order to protect her, so she flees Yavin in the night, leaving him with a poignant goodbye message, begging him to stay with the Alliance and fulfill his destiny. I would call this epic monologue number 2, but it's sort of broken up with intercut scenes of Andor rushing to catch her before it's too late. It's not so much a monologue as it is an overture, a narrative. Maybe I'm being a bit too picky. Fine, I'll give it epic monologue number 2. With the love of his life gone, Andor has nothing left in this universe except for the rebellion, and so he decides to stay on with them. And he witnesses the reprogramming of a KX series enforcer droid he recovered from Gorman. And welcome to the party, K2SO. The Mon Mothma part of the arc does not carry nearly as much emotional weight as the Gorman massacre. I was bawling like a baby during that entire episode. Syril's realization that Dedra was a monster, that she had been lying to him, using him, manipulating him, that he had been instrumental in causing a massacre, and that the person whom he had chosen to scapegoat for all of it had no idea who he even was. He died realizing his entire life was a waste, as innocents and freedom fighters alike were murdered en masse, all because their homes were in Palpatine's way. An entire planet manipulated into their own destruction by Luthen, by Palpatine, by Dedra and the ISB. The leader of the Gorman Front understood immediately that they were being led to their doom, but was powerless to calm his people and prevent violence. He could do nothing but stand by and watch, and in the end was forced to pick up a weapon and fight, because his only alternative was to give in meekly and and accept a meaningless and passive death. It was tough to get through, and this show holds nothing back, and I appreciate it so damn much for that. I wasn't crying crocodile tears for Cyril or for any single character that met their end that day. I was moved by what that day represented to everyone who experienced it. What happened at the Senate after that, it simply never stood a chance. There was no possible way that those events could top what came before, causing the greatest story arc in all of Andor and one of the finest in all of Star Wars to sort of go out with a whimper. The rebirth arc is the height of Andor. The final chapter is not bad at all. It just feels really anticlimactic when faced with the incredibility of the third arc. The final arc is what I'll call the setup arc. It takes place immediately preceding the events of Rogue One. Lonnie Young uses an emergency signal to contact Luthen. He broke into Dedra's files and discovered files related to the Death Star, the true goal of Palpatine's energy project. He begs Luthen to get him to safety, but when he tells Luthen everything he knows, Luthen kills him and he and Kleya begin working to shut down their operation and go into hiding. But as Luthen is trying to destroy the radio in his shop, there's a ring at the doorbell. Dedra Miro is waiting outside. He opens the door and the two chat about Luthen's collection. He even offers to sell her an antique knife. She says that she has an item he may be interested in and presents the Starpath unit that Andor tried to sell him at their first meeting. He doesn't try to feign ignorance and incredulousness. He drops the Luthen disguise as the smile fades from his face. He was caught. Dedra had won, but as she begins to notice sparks and smoke rising from the radio in the back, she's distracted and Luthen attempts to take his own life with the knife still in his hands. She manages to call a medic in time to save his life and get him to a hospital because she desperately needs the intelligence that he has. Kleya, seeing this from down the street, realizes the danger that Luthen and the rebellion are in. She infiltrates the hospital, blows up a bunch of stuff, and fights her way through the guards that remain outside Luthen's room. The entire time she's working her way through the hospital, she recalls the day they met. Luthen was a soldier in some unknown army. Perhaps it was an early Imperial militia, perhaps it was an early proto-Imperial group, maybe the Imperial army prior to uniform standardization. His unit was committing war crimes and Luthen returned to their ship, unable to handle the atrocities anymore. Kleya was hiding on his ship and he found her. Rather than become the monster that the rest of his unit had, he deserted and took Kleya with him, essentially becoming like a father to her. As they traveled living off pawned antiquities, they came to witness the Empire's cruelty towards the general public, and they decided to fight back. Returning to the present by the time she makes it to Luthen's room, she realizes that there is no way for her to get him out of the hospital, so she does the only thing that's available to her. She disconnects her father from the machine, keeping him alive. She stays long enough for him to go, and says her silent goodbyes before she leaves. It's definitely not what I expected. So many seeds were sown in season 1 that had me almost completely convinced that Luthen was a survivor of Order 66 and that Kleya had been his apprentice. But it turns out that no, they really were just ordinary people from the start, doing what they could to effect change on a galactic scale. It doesn't make them any more or less human, and this history would seem to call into question certain portions of Luthen's sacrifice speech, and it does create some continuity issues when it comes to the rise of the Empire and such, but overall, I don't think it's a bad backstory, and I regret nothing when I started this channel with a video listing the evidence that Luthen is a former Jedi. Perhaps both could technically be true, but honestly, I don't want an answer. I do just once again want to say that if this is a digitally DH Luthen, Disney has gotten creepy good at it, because seriously, Stellan Skarsgård looks like he just stepped off the set of Thor, and it really looks like they traveled 20 years into the past to have him play the part. In any event, Kleya calls for help and the imps track her down at the safe house Andor and Bix had once lived in, just as Andor and his old prison buddy Melshi show up. Kleya's completely given up hope, and you can tell that the loss of Luthen has all but broken her will to go on. She gives Andor the same message that Luthen made her memorize, all the information that Lonnie had found in Dedra's files before he fled. Information about Gorman, Kyber, Jedha, and Galen Erso. They become trapped in the safe house by an ISB strike team, but K2 Ezzo comes to the rescue at the last second and they manage to get Kleya back to Yavin for medical treatment. Andor relays the information to the Rebel Council, and it's a who's who of spot that person you remember from that one scene in Rogue One, except Bail Organa, who damn it, it's just not Jimmy Smits. They don't believe Andor or his sources, but Andor manages to create just enough doubt in Mon Mothma's mind that she asks Vel, also living on Yavin, to talk to Andor and see if she believes him. She does, which is just enough to convince Mon Mothma to trust him, and paired with one of Andor's sources on Kafrene begging for a meeting, the Alliance is starting to come around to the idea that the Empire might actually be building some sort of super weapon. The series ends as Dedra's boss, Major Partagaz, listens to Nemik's manifesto, apparently now spread throughout the galaxy, as he ponders the impossibility of the task he was given. He is about to be arrested for his failures and takes the easy way out instead. Dedra, arrested under direct orders from Director Krennic for learning about the Death Star without proper clearance, is sent to Narkina 5. By the Force, that is a damn fitting end to her story. Death would be too easy. Slaving away for the rest of her miserable life on the parts for the Emperor's super weapons projects that she murdered millions to help justify is just, it's just perfect. Clea wakes to look out over the people living on Yavin, freedom fighters ready and willing to fight the Empire, banding together and forming entire armies for the cause. The very thing that her and Luthen had struggled to achieve since the day they met, and you can see the gradual acceptance of hope slowly take hold. She doesn't smile. The pain of losing Luthen is still too fresh. But the universe doesn't look like such a dark place for his absence, and you get the feeling that she might be alright in the end. For some reason, they feel the need to show us that Mon Mothma's husband is now sleeping with their daughter's husband's mother. Like, were these even characters that anyone really cared enough about for someone to say, yeah, we can't leave these fates hanging? Bix is apparently back on Minarao. Okay, weird choice. And she's holding a baby, Andor's baby. A child for him to fight for. A legacy that he will leave behind without ever knowing it. Those who've seen Rogue One thought that he died in Jyn Erso's arms, knowing that they had brought the galaxy hope, not knowing if their actions would be enough to save it. It's a tragic end, but it's also beautifully bittersweet. Bix's future brings to light the fact that somewhere, someone is alive who owe their very existence to his sacrifice and who will actually carry on his memory. There are no words. Season 2 closes with Andor setting off to meet his contact, coming full circle up to the very moment that we meet him in Rogue One. Is Andor Season 2 a perfect story? No, absolutely not. The first story arc is probably the most pointless of anything we've seen in this series, very much on par with the rest of the Disney time sink content factory nonsense that we've seen in the past decade. You can essentially lift those 3 episodes out and be just as at home as you would be trying to jump back in with our heroes a year later in the start of episode 4. There are little bits of backstory that do add to what comes later here and there, but this isn't syndicated television. Each episode is not the exact same length. They can vary by as much as 20 minutes, so you could very easily take the bits out that matter, Director Krennic's secret meeting, and the others, if there are any others. They could easily be inserted into the rest of the season and the story would be just as complete and coherent without any runtimes being noticeably changed in the slightest. The time jumps with entire years passing between arcs, it makes it tough to stay invested in the story because you're stuck trying to figure out what's changed. Why are people living in this place when in the previous episode they were somewhere else? Why are people working for one faction in this episode but not the next? It's not as easy to insert yourself into the story as a side character, to become a fly on the wall of each scene as it was in Andor Season 1. Season 1 was very much a continuum of events, which meant that more time could be focused on characters and intrigue. Andor Season 2 isn't one season, it's 4 separate miniseries, and the amount of time that we lose resetting the stage is time that couldn't be spent diving deeper into the characters, the places, and the intrigue. There was an entire episode of Andor Season 2 where Cassian Andor doesn't even make an appearance, and a couple others where I swear he has less than 5 minutes of screen time.
Does that seem right to you?
This difficulty in maintaining a connected timeline also means that things had to be, well, dumbed down for the audience. In Season 1, we got Nemik's manifesto, One Way Out, Luthen's sacrifice, and We've Been Sleeping speeches, and they were each powerful, not because they beat you over the head with obvious and simple ideas, but because they lent poetic prose to difficult to fathom, but impossible to ignore truths. In Andor Season 2, the best that we got was Mon Mothma's address to the Senate, and it tries the metaphor game, it tries to be poetic, but then it ends by slapping you over the face with the moral of the story, calling out the villain by name. That's not how you convince others to join your cause. You have to lead them to the conclusion and let them form it for yourselves. How long have you been a senator? By the time the final episode rolls around, pretty much all the heavy plot-driven storytelling, all the action, it's all pretty well been spent and set in stone. The only thing left to do is set the stage for Rogue One. And it does that quite well, but the final episode reads more like an epilogue where we already know what's going to come next. But with all that criticism aside, Season 2 is not just good, it's as close to perfect as we have any right to expect. Not because the story was infallible at every step, not because it remained in lockstep with the Star Wars timeline and has no continuity errors, not because it surpassed Season 1 in every way, and it certainly wasn't because it gave us everything we hoped and dreamed about since Season 1 ended. It did none of those things. However, it is still my heavily biased opinion that Season 2 is perfect because it did something that nobody has had the courage to do in the entire history of Star Wars. It gave us an absolute ending. Season 2 could have picked up exactly where Season 1 left off. It could have played in a murky timeline of 5 years separating Andor Season 1 and Rogue One. They could have milked their fans dry by releasing season after season of less and less inspired work, giving us story without substance, taking our time and money without giving us value or meaning in exchange. But Tony Gilroy chose a different path. He decided that it was better to tell a story with a purpose, a complete story. He chose art over profit. Though the story suffers a lack of cohesiveness as a result, the fact that this season spans the entire gap between Season 1 and Rogue One means that for better or worse, this is it. This is all we're getting. There can be no more adventures of Andor, at least none that would be taken seriously as anything more than a wanton cash grab. Gilroy set out to give us the life story of a rebel from the moment destiny forced a blaster into his hands to the moment that he gave his life for a just cause. Season 2 forces that conclusion. It doesn't allow for additional seasons. Rogue One doesn't allow for sequels. The story of Andor is now finished. It's complete and it's good. Nobody can take that away from us. For the first time ever, Star Wars fans have something that can't be messed with. It is permanent. Andor Seasons 1 and 2 and Rogue One now form a trilogy. Disney can try to force side quest content that runs in the margins. They can try releasing prequels or reboots, but ultimately, it won't matter whether they're actually good or not. We will always have this as it is right now. For the first time since the prequel trilogy wrapped up, Star Wars fans have a complete trilogy, one that adds to the world of Star Wars and offers a compelling narrative. Each entry has its moments of brilliance. Each entry has its faults and imperfections. But each and every one builds to the final moment of the last, and when the credits roll on Rogue One, we're left with something beautiful that will be cherished for generations. The story of Cassian Andor is already ours. A story of destiny, a story of the Force guiding our hero to always be where the galaxy needs him, whether our hero believes in the Force or not. A story of loss, pain, and sacrifice, but in the end, it will always ultimately be a story of hope.